5 years from now, we'll still be researching the potential of industrial hemp. 10 years from now, we'll be well on our way to a multi-billion-dollar industry. And 20 years from now, when I'm long gone, hemp will be everywhere and people will be saying, what was the big deal?
That's Geoff Whaling, chair of the National Hemp Association. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock. And today's episode is in response to last week's show where we talked to folks who were at the table for that hemp industry farm bill priority discussion at NOCA. I heard from Geoff Whaling after I published the episode, and I invited him on to this week's show to hear about NHA's priorities for the 2023 Farm Bill. We're going to hear all about that, plus other initiatives that NHA is working on. We're going to take a quick sponsor break and then come back with some updates and a few nuggets of hemp news. This episode is made possible with support from Impactful Ventures, who encourage you to check out Farm, a platform enabling climate-minded investors to partner with leaders in regenerative agriculture who are improving the health and value of their land. Visit farmland.fi to learn more. This episode is brought to you in part by I&D Hemp in Fort Benton, Montana, where they believe in the goodness of hemp. I&D Hemp is a family-owned, mission-driven, and environmentally focused industrial hemp food, feed, and fiber company, providing new opportunities for farmers and rural communities. Their mission is to provide innovative agricultural products and services to connect American farmers with the pioneers and businesses that see hemp as a way to bring real and lasting change to our communities and planet. Learn more at indhemp.com. All right, welcome back. So here we are. Today is April 12th, 2023. I can't believe it's nearly the middle of April already. Things are getting warm here in southeastern Pennsylvania. This week's temperatures are going to be in the 80s. It's just a little unseasonably warm, but it looks like we've got some rain headed our way over the weekend. That's good. I've got my peas in the ground already, and I'm looking forward to getting a few more things in the ground as the ground warms up. So anyway, just a few nuggets of hemp news this week. Here's an interesting update from the USDA Ag Research Service, the ARS. The headline says, scientists evaluate potential human cannabinol exposure from consuming meat if cattle is fed hemp seed cake. And I'm just going to read a few of the highlights. It says, currently, hemp seed cake cannot legally be used in food animal rations because the magnitude of cannabinoid residues remaining in edible animal tissues have not been characterized. To determine if hemp seed cake could be safely used as a source of protein and fiber in cattle feed, a team of USDA, ARS, and North Dakota State University researchers, led by research physiologist David Smith, evaluated cannabinoid residues, CBD and THC, in edible tissues of cattle that were fed hemp seed cake. Scientists found that the concentration of these chemical compounds in meat products contributed only a small fraction of the total amount global regulatory organizations consider safe for consumers. According to our exposure assessment, it would be very difficult for a human to consume enough fat from cattle fed with hemp seed cake to exceed regulatory guidelines for dietary THC exposure, said David Smith with the Animal Metabolism Agricultural Chemicals Research Unit in Fargo, North Dakota. From a food safety viewpoint, hemp seed cake having low cannabinoid content can be a suitable source of crude protein and fiber in cattle feed while offering industrial hemp producers a potential market for this byproduct of hemp seed oil extraction, Smith says. Yeah, so that's good news in the world of hemp as a livestock feed. All right, what else? Well, here's one about Argentina's hemp harvest from the International Cannabis Business Conference website. It says that Argentina's government participated in first legal hemp harvests in half a century. The Ministry of Agriculture, the National Agri-Food Health and Quality Service, and the National Seed Institute participated in the first experimental harvests of industrial hemp on Argentine soil after 50 years, it was officially reported. The cultivation practices are developed by the national company Industrial Hemp Solutions, within the possibilities offered by the new regulatory framework for medicinal cannabis and industrial hemp. All right, there you go. Good job, Argentina. And then lastly, here's sort of a pessimistic story about hemp that I found on Time Magazine's website. The headline reads, "Now that weed is mostly legal, hemp should be booming, but it's not." The story was written by Aaron Baker, and it talks about the good things that hemp can be used for, but it spends more time kind of, talking down about these things or how unlikely they are. I'm not really sure what to think about the story. It doesn't seem helpful, but then again, it's good to hear perspective from outside the hemp bubble. But part of me thinks this is just commentary from the marijuana bubble. The article concludes like this: "For hemp to reach its full potential, marijuana still needs to be decriminalized." So what do you think? Is hemp's fate really at the mercy of marijuana? I will put a link to this story and the other stories on the show page for this episode. Check them out and let me know what you think. All right, so one more thing before we get into my interview with Geoff Whaling from the National Hemp Association. In effort to be transparent and forthcoming, it's important that I tell you that the National Hemp Association has been a sponsor of this podcast in the past. But even if they weren't, I still would have offered the NHA a chance to respond to last week's episode, since several of last week's guests mentioned their absence from the conversation. Anyway, here we go. Geoff Whaling, Chair of the National Hemp Association, welcome back to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing?
I am very well. Happy spring to you and to all of your listeners.
Yeah, thanks. So on last week's show, it was sort of a recap about a policy meeting that took place at the NOCO Hemp Expo. And as was mentioned on that show, the National Hemp Association wasn't really formally represented there. I know Courtney Moran, who was on your board, she was there. I'm not sure if she was quite in her capacity as a NHA board member there. So I thought we could check in with you and just, get some response and also hear about what NHA's Farm Bill priorities are.
Oh, super. Well, thanks for the opportunity. And you're correct. Courtney was there as a speaker, a panelist at NOCO. And I believe, as she said on your podcast, she had heard of this meeting from the stage when it was announced that this meeting was taking place. I had heard of this meeting, but not in any formal way. I, too, was asked to be a speaker at NOCO, and it was a decision by our board that we would not invest the funds for us to participate this year. And when I gave Morris that notification about a week, 10 days before, he had said to me, "Oh, that's too bad, because we're going to try and get the leadership of the industry together for a meeting." And that was the only time that I heard of the potential of any meeting. So I really didn't take note of it because it wasn't formal. And if someone was trying to organize a meeting of the industry, there would have been more notification. There would have been advance opportunities to weigh in and have a discussion. I understand there was a document distributed at the event that said it was the consensus of the industry. As one of the leading organizations, we weren't there, so I don't know how there could be consensus. It might have been a consensus of a few people that were at that meeting.
Right. So anyway, I understand there's, I guess, politics involved here sometimes among some of these groups, but I want to find out what your priorities are, what the National Hemp Association's priorities going into the Farm Bill year are, and sort of what you're doing to achieve these goals.
Well, and certainly some may call it politics. I think, we understand our members, we understand the industry, so we have just stayed in our own lane. And certainly there are other people that are vying for new members. We all are, and are trying to demonstrate leadership. But certainly we recognize that we're called upon by, our members, we're called upon our supporters, we're called upon congressional staff to help them move issues forward. And so we're quite happy with that position, and we'll continue to stay in that lane.
Describe that lane a little bit more.
Well, it's, the National Hemp Association is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. I've now chaired the organization for 6, and certainly have gone through the growing pains that the industry has. So we've been there through the 2014 Farm Bill, through the 2018 Farm Bill. We're still here. And certainly we not only visually see the challenges, we hear constantly what the challenges are with state stakeholders, with state legislative groups. Eric, when HIA collapsed and dropped its state chapters, we at National Hemp Association offered a platform for those organizations to come together. That's now been operating as a standing committee of hemp organizations for a number of years. We helped fund it, gave it some seed money so it could continue working together. They have been a great sounding board and group for us to work with on state issues. They've been informing us of what's been happening at the state level, and certainly we have been trying to help them through that process, as they have helped us understand what the challenges are in their states that can only be addressed at the federal level. So that has been a good working relationship. And certainly I'm very proud of the work that the group has been doing for the last 3 years and their contributions that they've made. Listen, it hasn't always been a cohesive discussion. Because, as diverse as this industry is, there are still people who have invested a significant amount of money in the cannabinoid space. And certainly they want their voices heard over those that are really focusing on fiber and grain. The Farm Bill this go around has the opportunity for us to address those issues. The other part of our lane is that, I'm very proud of the fact that I've been asked to attend a number of international meetings, whether or not it's at the UN General Assembly, with the International Food and Agricultural Organization, with IFAD, which is the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and work with them as they are developing policy, looking at this opportunity and understanding more about this opportunity. So we now, I believe, had 10 or 12 international hemp organizations that have come under an umbrella that's very similar to our state organization. It is the National Hemp Association of International Hemp Organizations. Again, it's a free platform for those organizations to participate on. We've had a couple meetings with them, and again, identifying ways that we can all work together, that we can support them. Obviously, National Hemp Association has put together a number of documents that we share freely with those groups to help them develop policy and explain what the potential is. And certainly we will continue to do that. And last but not least, our standing committee on social equity, very proud of the work that they have been doing. Calvin and Faye have really been out there talking about the roles that Black farmers can play in this industry. As you've heard me say many times, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that we must get right, and we must provide this opportunity for everyone. And certainly Calvin has been leading that standing committee, along with Erica, who has been our voice at every one of these groups meetings. They meet on a regular basis to make sure that we are working towards an end goal, and that goal is to build an industry not only here at home, but around the world.
Right. Yeah, you're right. We only get like this one chance to rebuild the system. And so it's important work that's getting done here. When you talked about the group of international hemp organizations, are other countries sort of dealing with the same sorts of growing pains that we are here? Or, what are some of the commonalities? What are some of the differences?
Well, it is only because of the work that we've done through the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill that most nations are now paying attention to industrial hemp. They no longer fear any repercussions or retaliation from the U.S. government. Like universities first feared, losing federal funding if they started to research hemp when hemp was not removed from the Controlled Substances Act. These international nations and organizations feared potentially losing U.S. support. Because America had this war on drugs. And it has not been completely addressed publicly. So it's really kind of a one-off nation by nation as they're learning and wanting to see. But for me to have the president of Malawi tap me on the shoulder and ask me if I could engage with him, his office, his agricultural secretary, because they have declared industrial hemp to be a commodity of importance. And if anybody has been watching what's going on in Malawi, they have now suffered twice. 2 major cyclones coming in and ravaging those nations. And so they're looking for something new, and hemp might be part of that solution. And the word is starting to travel. And we certainly not only can provide them with technical assistance and advice as to how to build out this industry and this infrastructure, the supply chain, but we also must work on identifying the technical barriers that are preventing or will prevent American hemp growers from selling into those marketplaces. So it's kind of a hand in glove sort of situation moving forward.
Okay. Let's switch over to talking about the Farm Bill. What are your priorities going into this Farm Bill year?
Well, it's ironic that the groups that met at NOCO started to meet about the priorities for 2023 when we all knew that the Farm Bill was being organized. It's done every 5 years, and discussion started, as much as a year ago. We at the National Hemp Association absolutely sat down and talked about what are our priorities going into this, because it's not just a once and done meeting process. It's a long, lengthy process.
Sure.
So as you know, the first thing that we needed to work forward on was to bifurcate fiber and grain away from cannabinoids. Let's be truthful about the 2018 Farm Bill. Most of the language that was put into that bill, in addition to removing hemp from the Controlled Substances Act, gave a voice to the cannabinoid industry. And Eric, as you know, I was one of the founders of the Coalition for Access Now, trying to get access of CBD to those families who were seeking an alternative and really kind of looking at what the opportunities might be. So absolutely, I was there, lock and step on trying to make sure that that language was there. Certainly, Paige Figge and I, who co-founded Coalition for Access Now, had a disagreement when the Charlotte's Web Act was not getting traction. I said, I think if we kind of move this forward in the Farm Bill, and make sure that that language included all parts of the plant, then CBD would come along for the ride. Little did I know that there would be unforeseen consequences. I mean, there is never a clean legislative process. And what came out of the 2018 Farm Bill is that the priority was given to a discussion around cannabinoids. And we all know what's happened with that. There were a lot of people who quickly came to that industry, a lot of farmers who thought that this was an opportunity, and that collapsed because of the reality of the great surge in the interest of getting this crop up and running, but also because there were a number of really bad actors in this space.
And so hopefully that's all behind us now, and we can focus on fiber and grain, right? Because from where I'm coming from, that's the important work of hemp here. I mean, I've said this many times before that, I love cannabinoids. I think they're an amazing opportunity for human health. But where I'm sitting, I'm looking at carbon in the atmosphere and climate change and scaling up industrial hemp to meet that challenge. And however many cannabinoids we grow, it's not going to do that. Fiber and grain can help.
Well, and I don't want to negate the importance that cannabinoids have in this marketplace.
Right, right.
I don't know that any of us foresaw, all of the various minor cannabinoids that are now coming to the marketplace. But they're here, and certainly we've been in discussions with the FDA. We know that the FDA, although their press release, I think, was misconstrued, they are looking for a framework so that they can look at cannabinoids and can bring them to the marketplace, but also have that flexibility of addressing the minor cannabinoids that are yet undiscovered. And there's no point in legislation, which is really kind of finite legislation, being introduced on cannabinoids when, in fact, the potential is that 6 months from now, 8 months from now, 10 months from now, there will be another set of minor cannabinoids that will be coming in the marketplace that will be going through the same problem right now. So absolutely, cannabinoids are important. I think that language will be amended. And I think that the FDA is seeking some help from Congress. But the opportunity now is really to seize what we've identified at the National Hemp Association as a $15 trillion total addressable market that hemp can play in. And that is fiber and grain. 15
trillion. That's a lot of hemp.
Yeah, that's a lot of hemp. And certainly, it is the global market where we all know that hemp can play a role in not only textiles, which is the obvious thing that most people gravitate to, but fuels and housing and grain and feed. Those are huge markets. And if we can get just a small slice of those, that will certainly allow industrial hemp to take its rightful place.
So what's the strategy?
So, well, we started looking at that head on. Certainly, we were hearing from farmers that said that, they were embarrassed, having to go to the local county courthouse in communities that were quite small, showing up at the courthouse, getting their fingerprints taken, having to submit to an FBI background check, and people kind of doing that silent little whisper that they were drug dealers or they were doing something wrong. And certainly that is not what, when industrial hemp was declared to be a commodity, anyone thought was really going to be a barrier, but absolutely it has been. Yep. So if you take the baggage that's come from the cannabinoid side and space, and the simple fact that people are still required to do FBI background checks, have testing brought in, and certainly, give their fingerprints, we needed to try to work with farmers so that they could grow this as a row crop. And I know that our job is to continue to educate. And some might be shocked, but we went into some senior Senate offices with the draft of what was originally the the fiber and grain hemp exemption, now the Industrial Hemp Act of 2023. Mm-hmm. We would go into senators' offices who were leaders in this space, and their staff did not know or believe that you could plant hemp as a row crop. When we talked to them about the legislation and the language that we were bringing forward, that this was going to bifurcate hemp from cannabinoids, so that, and I said in a discussion, so that farmers could grow hemp just like they grow corn. The response was, well, not just like corn, Geoff. They can't grow it like corn. They still have to take those little seed pods and plant them individually. And I said, no, like corn in a seeder. And they were surprised. Wow. And that certainly speaks to what people understand hemp to be, and the efforts that we all undertook to educate people on cannabinoids. But we all know that hemp can be grown like a row crop in fields as a rotational crop, and that's really what the opportunity is.
Yeah, I've seen it myself. I've been in those fields. It doesn't look anything like a marijuana grow. It doesn't look like a CBD farm. It looks like, just big farming,
Yeah, and I think images were our best tools in those discussions, so that we could show people the difference between a cannabinoid grow, both in a small plot in a greenhouse versus a fiber and grain crop in fields, hundreds of acres. And again, it's just, it's an educational process. I know that many of us who have been in this space for a long time think that it's a no-brainer, that people absolutely understand it. Not true. And certainly we still have work to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think hemp needs to be big, boring, and ubiquitous, right? It's just, we have to grow this at scale, and not just scale like corn and soy, but I think we can go bigger than corn and soy. But
well, yeah.
I'm a dreamer. I'm a simpleton. Come on.
Well, as I've been known to say, 5 years from now, we'll still be researching the potential of industrial hemp. 10 years from now, we'll be well on our way to a multi-billion-dollar industry. And 20 years from now, when I'm long gone, hemp will be everywhere, and people will be saying, "What was the big deal?" I too dream, Eric. So remember me telling you 20 years from now that we'll succeed.
Yeah.
There is not, going back to what our plans are. So the first step was to introduce legislation that was standalone legislation, and to the credit of Morgan Elliott Tweet, to Courtney Moran, and to Erica Stark, they started this process now 18 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, again, we went back to Senator Braun and Senator Tester and asked them if they would help us. Senator Tester, obviously, is the senator from IND Hemp's state, and saw firsthand the challenges and the opportunity, and was prepared to lead. So, together with the staff in those two offices, that champion team kind of started writing the legislation, not knowing that it was going to take 18 months to get a bill introduced. But you know what? That's the process.
Sure.
And we always knew that as time was going by, that the other option was that if this did not become a standalone bill, we would be going through the process. We would have had legislative affairs. We would have had USDA. We would have had NASDA and others all look at this legislation and see it. And we would have gone through and over most of the hurdles, so that if it did not proceed as a standalone bill, that language could be dropped into the Farm Bill. And
what's sort of the status of it now? Do you think it will ultimately be put into the Farm Bill?
I think we and we're at that stage. Again, going back to the meeting that was held at NOCO, again, the timing of it was a little odd. I think it was held on the very day that the U.S. Senate, the senators who had any comments or any language or asked of the Farm Bill had to have them in that day. So I don't know why a group was busy meeting when they had passed that deadline. And there certainly weren't any U.S. senators in that room. The reason is that the House is now leading this Farm Bill go around. Okay. It alternates between the Senate and the House. 2018 Farm Bill, it's why Mitch McConnell had a big role in it.
Industrial hemp.
It was led by the Senate and the U.S. Senate Ag Committee. This go around, it's being led by G.T. Thompson, Pennsylvania senator, who is our congressman, who is also the chair of the House Ag Committee. So we have been in those discussions already with them, because we needed to make sure that they knew what our approach was. And generally, we are now looking for a whole of government approach to industrial hemp. We spend an inordinate amount of time talking to various departments, divisions within USDA, and various departments that should be looking at hemp, who don't consider hemp to be a biomass, who don't understand that hemp is legal. I have discussions all the time. I talked earlier about my role with the UN and some of the organizations. I unfortunately have to have discussions with the State Department all the time, who don't believe or ask me when I talk about hemp being used to address or being part of the solution to provide nutrition for families and people around the world. They're saying, that's a great idea, Geoff, but hemp's not legal. And I'm like, well, in the country I come from, it is. And they don't know. They
Right.
just don't know.
That's
So
amazing.
we're taking the approach of a whole of government approach to industrial hemp. And there are ways that we can make that happen.
All right. So what other considerations are you looking for Farm Bill?
Well, certainly there are a number of issues. Obviously, the fiber and grain hemp exemption, or what is now the Industrial Hemp Act of 2023, is our biggest priority.
Mm-hmm.
Followed quickly on FDA directions on not just cannabinoids, but animal feed. Certainly, again, when we were writing and moving to get the 2018 Farm Bill passed, there was language submitted at the last minute by two senators, Chuck Grassley being one of them, and supported by Mitch McConnell.
Industrial hemp.
That ensured that nothing in that bill changed the authority of Health and Human Services and the FDA. That meant that everything was going to have to go through the FDA, and that included animal feed.
Yeah.
And although, we get this question all the time, why is it okay for us to eat hemp hearts, we as humans, but it's not okay for us to give that, to our dogs? It's a good question, but the reality is the authority for all things that are consumed by us or consumed by animals that go into the human chain is left squarely with the FDA.
Right.
And so, chickens and goats and beef and turkeys and everything that could either see hemp seed fed directly to them or processed and made into a supplement or added into a grain, all of that has to be researched. All of that has to be studied. And there isn't enough money in our industry to go through that. And, the other catch is that the private sector is not going to invest in doing that research if at the end of the day, they can't own that IP. Mm. And that happens to be part of the rules as well, is that anybody that submits a study to the FDA for approval and it gets approved, everyone can then use that for their own purposes. So, we recognize that. FDA has some money to advance that research. USDA has money for that research, but there's also other huge pockets of money within the federal government that could advance research. So one of our asks in this go around is to ask the National Science Foundation to also be looking at and approving research and advancing research through universities, through the private sector on hemp.
Okay. And the industry is making progress. We've got here in Pennsylvania, I guess it's Chickies Creek eggs. They can feed hemp grain to poultry, and a few other states around the country are also working on similar things, right?
Well, and that's concerning to me because, that might be another repeat of the CBD folding being introduced across the country. And certainly we've brought this to the attention of the FDA that, again, it is one of the realities where states are recognizing that this is an opportunity. They have authority to what can be advanced in their own state. Certainly Montana has done it. Pennsylvania has done it. They're one-offs and they are only programs in their states. We are hopeful that this go around with the Farm Bill will certainly cut that off at the knees before. I think there are 10 or 12 states that are advancing hemp for animal feed, because not only does it make sense, again, if you and I can use it, if you and I can consume it, why can't we feed it at least to our domesticated animals? Why can't we feed this to dogs and cats and, your goldfish and others? That is a $4 billion market. Yeah. And why shouldn't hemp have a role? And if we need to do the research for feed for animals that are going into the human supply chain, let's recognize it and let's find ways to get that done by the National Science Foundation and USDA.
But your concern is that having like a patchwork of state regulations is just messy and probably creates more problems than it solves?
Well, it most definitely is that patchwork approach. And we know that it didn't work very well for cannabinoids. And I think that if we were able to move this forward on a national program, then all citizens would be able to participate. As you talked about, Crider's eggs, chickens here in Pennsylvania, they submitted an application. They worked closely with the Hemp Feed Coalition. They submitted that application through the process at FDA, and the FDA acknowledged receipt of it, and it's just sitting there. One of the problems is that there aren't enough staff within the FDA's veterinary group to process these applications, and so it sits there. Crider's had, and we encourage them to submit that to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. And certainly they did. PDA acknowledged, accepted the research that was done, and gave them conditional approval to launch that product here in Pennsylvania, and it's been an overwhelming success. And certainly, shouldn't they be allowed to sell those eggs in other markets that are across state lines? I think yes, but they can't. And ironically, if there's a misshipment, they could lose that license that PDA has given them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Other considerations for the Farm Bill or the work that you're doing at NHA?
Well, I think, if I ever do leave this, I am going to be perfectly schooled to be a juggler in Cirque du Soleil, because we're trying to do all things at the same time.
Yeah.
So we're moving legislation forward. We're continuing to educate. We are working to look at those new markets that are available. We're continuing to educate divisions within USDA itself, as we continue to educate other departments. Participated recently in a White House conference where they were taking a whole of government approach to new energy, and specifically new energies. And I think there were 5 or 6 federal agencies involved in the White House, agencies that were looking at bringing about solutions to alternative energies in communities, rural communities specifically, that have been affected by either the closing down or the reduction in size of the coal industry.
Right.
And certainly they were looking at ways that they could bring new industry, they could help remediate those soils, they could produce new plant-based energy sources. And it just, kept ringing to me, yes, that could be hemp. Mm-hmm. So we're working to advance that through the DOE and the group that is advancing that. But we work across the board with our members who are really struggling to find ways to bring a fiber and grain crop to market, but also to produce those end products that we all know that industrial hemp can participate in. Research is going to be really important to this. Working with stakeholders, and as I said in a recent LinkedIn posting, it's really important for us to always be open to who's approaching us at events and who wants to talk to us. You just never know what might come out of it. NHA participated with New Holland Agriculture at Ag Progress Days in Decatur, Illinois. We were talking to American farmers about the potential of hemp, and I was approached by 2 gentlemen who were from the Decatur Water Processing Center. And they had said that they had heard about the potential of hemp being able to stop erosion, to consume CO2, to be a phytoremediator. And I said to them, absolutely, yes, we know that. We need to advance research. Why do ask? They told me a story about how their own authority, water authority, had invested $90 million in cleaning and dredging out the Lake Decatur, which is the source for the drinking water of the people of Decatur, Illinois,
Mm-hmm.
where our event was being hosted. And it had filled up with silt again, runoff, and contaminants. And you know what? They went back to one of their researchers, and 2 years since then, we have formed a partnership. We brought in a number of our hemp partners, Rachel Berry and Tiger Fiber. We brought them all into and applied to USDA, and were awarded a $9.5 million research study to look at hemp as being one of those potential solutions to water contamination and runoff. And so those are the sorts of things that don't get a lot of discussion, don't get a lot of press, but that's real.
Yeah.
That's out there, and that certainly will help the industry. And it's a 5-year study. So
that's great.
Yeah, and happens to be in the hometown of ADM, one of the largest agricultural movers. And we've reached out to them because certainly the farmers that grow in their region that supply them are going to be growing hemp. So this will be a way for us to further those discussions.
So where is NHA on carbon credits? What kind of work are you doing in that space?
Well, as you know, we worked with Senator Braun, Senator Whitehouse, in advancing what was originally called the Growing Climate Solution Act, which was to create a platform for carbon credits. Obviously, we all know in the hemp industry that hemp can play a major role in that. But again, the legislative process is not specific to one commodity. So the Growing Climate Solution Act was introduced by Senator Braun and Whitehouse, and certainly it was going to be asking USDA to create a platform or an advisory board. Did not get a lot of traction, and at that point, we were very proud that the National Hemp Association's logo was front and center. But during the first round of this administration, Senator Stabenow jumped on board. The House had a companion bill, and the Growing Climate Solution Act not only went to the U.S. Senate and got a vote of 92-8. There were 300 companies that jumped on board, and the president signed it into law as part of the appropriations bill that was passed in January. That now mandates that USDA create an advisory board to create a platform. And so we are hopeful of having a seat at that table so that we can discuss it. There is lots of activity going on in carbon credits, but an awful lot that is not yet understood. And ironically, as I work with groups around the world, we're now being asked by those groups who are looking at hemp to be part of the solution for a commodity, to create an industry in areas that were clear cut for us. They're then approaching us saying, hey, wait, what do you know about carbon credits? They're asking us to help them bring their carbon credits, not only to get them verified, but then to take them to the commercial marketplace. It's a huge opportunity. But as there is in the hemp industry a misunderstanding, there needs to be a universal platform. There needs to be SEC approval. And we are seeing that there are some really great companies coming out. Invert out of Canada is doing really well. Capturient, which is a new fund that's received preliminary SEC approval, that's really looking at this holistically. Obviously, Vera is the gold standard right now for verifying carbon credits. But you need to make sure that we have a full understanding. And for us in the hemp industry, not only will we be able to start educating on all of the revenues that are available through hemp, we will be able to talk about a regenerative agricultural farming practice, which will enhance carbon credits if people are planting hemp, because hemp can be a super sinker of carbon. And certainly there are such opportunities. So it's an issue that we are seeing must be addressed. We're happy to have a role and a seat at the table, but it's one of those things that is going to take some time to really bring into play. But stay tuned. It's another one of the exciting things that has come about because we're in the hemp industry.
Where do we go from here, Geoff? What's going to happen in the next few months?
Well, the Farm Bill is our number one priority. Although we're participating in events, the State Department and USDA have invited us to participate in a pre-COP28 conference called Aim for Climate. Again, world leaders will be coming to Washington in May, and hemp will be front and center, one of, I think, 15 groups that'll be displaying there. We'll be, as we advance hemp and the discussion about hemp around the world, we'll be really laser focused on the Farm Bill. The first thing that we're doing is accumulating co-sponsors for the Industrial Hemp Act of 2023. So we would encourage anyone to go to the hempexemption.com website or the National Hemp Association.org website, and certainly reach out to your U.S. senators, asking them to get on board to support this. We are working on a companion bill in the House. And certainly, Eric, as you know, G.T. Thompson has been a big supporter of industrial hemp. And so we have a champion who is leading the Farm Bill. So I think that, we will be able to get a lot of our asks addressed, but we're not going to take anything for granted.
All right. Geoff Whaling, Chair of the National Hemp Association, thank you so much for your time today and for the work that you're doing in the space.
I love it. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, there you go, Geoff Whaling from the National Hemp Association. I will put links to some of the things that he talked about on the show page for this episode at lancasterfarming.com, along with links to those news items that I mentioned in the News Nuggets section. So anyway, that does it for me. My name is Eric Herlock. I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper. Say it with me, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online at lancasterfarming.com. If you have any questions or comments or concerns for me, you can always email me. Send it directly to podcast@lancasterfarming.com. All right. Anyway, until next time, I will see you in the newspaper. Season 3, Episode 12 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2023 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, which is part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show was written and recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock. The music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.